So this is part B of the world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street by the KhoodeelaarTV campaign on Sunday, the 13th of September 2020, coming from London. In fact, defending the community in the East End of London, defending the community by upholding the universal values. All the values that we have been upholding for decades as the modes of defending the community in the East End of London have been applicable for the defense of communities across the UK and beyond. So we have been setting examples in everything we have been doing, all the modus operandi we have applied and we have employed and we have engaged in have been publicly accessible, evident, and asserted. So anyone who has been a student of the actions that we have been carrying out can have no excuse to be ignorant about our mode, our modus, and our values. So how is it that Boris Johnson and his cabal, now fronting the cabal, bigger cabal of the Conservatives, are behaving in a way that suggests that there is no activity, there is no activist anywhere in the UK who would even notice the brazen breaches of the obligations and the charters and the treaties and the conventions that the UK has been, as a signed-up member, been obliged to carry out and protect the rights of the people according to those conventions, those charters, those treaties, those agreements, and how, by extrapolation in the current context, can Boris Johnson's equally law-breaking counterparts in Greece assume that their breaches of the law, their criminality, has not been anticipated by those like myself who have been engaging in upholding the argument on which the United Nations has been founded and which values and aims and purposes have been under threat from the likes of the UK and the likes of other member countries. Now, here in the Observer today, the piece by Michael Savage and Toby Helm is the piece main lead story in the Observer. Have a look. And it gives a prominent, respectful, deferential kind of locus to the top lawyers. Now, of course, I agree with the line, general line that they are taking in that particular reported event where they confronted Suella Braverman, the Suella that I discussed yesterday, along with Priti Patel. And I said that there were two of the most kind of shameless, ignorant, and corrupt careerists recruited by the corrupt organization, the Conservatives, as it is under the management of the right wing, the fascists, that can be found in the ranks of the sons and daughters, or daughters and sons of the so-called successful immigrants. The other side, the Labour Party side, is of course filled by Sadiq Khan, Roxana Fiaz, and Sajid Javid, who is not on the Labour side, but he's kind of has got something common with the other two. Apparently, he is in the same bracket as the son of a Pakistani bus driver. Although Sajid Javid, like Argentina's son of an Iraqi or Syrian immigrant, has denounced, in effect, his Muslim heritage and origin. And the Argentinian who had denounced his heritage and Muslim origin was chucked out himself by the Argentinian establishment. So they didn't actually get convinced or get carried away by his oozing surrender of everything that was in his identity and everything that he could chuck away as part of his career is dishonesty. And what is happening here in the Observer is that this Toby Helm and Michael Savage piece is written on the assumption that the top lawyer slamming the minister for wrecking UK's reputation would actually amount to stopping Boris Johnson doing the criminality. I have got news for them, and I'm saying this exclusively in this edition, that just like they didn't succeed in exposing and halting the Brexit madness and lunacy, so they will fail here in stopping Johnson and Suella Cowardly and others from pursuing their illegal criminal project. And I say this because the opposition to the cabal fronted by Johnson, the opposition in Parliament is non-existent, because Keir Starmer is too mediocre and too timid and too kind of opportunistic and too narrow-minded. And I don't believe that Starmer himself believes that he can dislodge Johnson. It's not because there is no evidence to dislodge Johnson. It is because Starmer doesn't believe that he can dislodge Johnson. And that is why I'm saying Starmer is a coward and is ignorant and he's not as intelligent as he is made out to be in the propaganda lines that have been running for him, in comparison with Jeremy Corbyn, of course. And Corbyn himself contributed to the creation of the myth that Starmer was a person possessing forensic skills. That shows Jeremy Corbyn's stupidity and ignorance. And what is happening here is that these lawyers who are from the Bar Council, lawyers are not revolutionaries. Lawyers are not political kind of activists that make any difference. They have done this with Johnson and the Brexiteers. They took two decisively anti-Brexiteering kind of steps through the Supreme Court, and that didn't make any difference. And I'm saying again, because in the actual parliament, the elected parliament, there have never been enough people with the courage, with the intelligence, with the integrity, and with the vision, or with the concern for democracy and the well-being and welfare of the people as a whole, the majority, the many, to use the term that has been fraudulently borrowed by Corbyn-fronted cabal at one stage. It is something that I have been advocating for a long time, and all advocates and thinkers and analysts and observers of the world scene for the last few decades have been doing. In fact, it dates back to the very beginning of the foundation of the United Nations in 1948, or the declarations, the biggest declaration that came out in the late 1940s. And in the 72 years since the United Nations was founded, all the founding member countries and the other countries where some of the key or leading drafters of the declarations came from, including the UK, these countries have been neglecting the very declarations that actually they helped draft for the foundation of the United Nations. And as I said, one of the leading kind of supporters of the United Nations idea was Tony Benn. And in his speech in 1999 in the House of Commons, Benn delivered a speech which was typically kind of regarded as intelligent, but to me, it was not intelligent enough, let alone comprehensive enough, let alone complete as a commentary on the state of the compliance by likes of the British state of with the aims and objects that these states remain signed up to, aims and objects of the United Nations. Here is a note about anyone watching this. This is coming live now, and it is 9:34 GMT in London. And I'm saying to whoever is watching this live, or whoever may be watching it later, this is 09:34 GMT on Sunday, the 13th of September 2020. And this is my disclaimer halfway through or midway through this. Everything I'm saying is, of course, covered by my authoring rights, because I'm summarizing my findings for the benefit, for the ease of people watching this in understanding and getting accessing this information I'm delivering. But everything is based on extensive studies I have been conducting throughout of what the United Nations is doing and what the member countries have been doing and what the countries in between have been doing. By in between, I mean people who are nominally covered by member states, but who are not represented by the behavior of the member states. And the fundamental argument against the bureaucracy of the United Nations that I've had is and has been that it is not an organization where ordinary people, activists, campaigners, thinkers have got any access or any say. The only thing they have is as kind of subordinate or tertiary kind of agencies controlled by the layers and layers and layers of United Nations bureaucracy. The actual representations are open only to governments of the states. Now that is totally contrary to most of the aims and objects of the United Nations. Essentially, although the phrasing may suggest otherwise, but essentially the purpose to create peace, to ensure just due process access and availability of these to the ordinary citizens or ordinary members of the countries or the people subjected to lack of statehood and all the other injustices, the victims of injustices. There is no forum equivalent to the General Assembly in terms of recognition. And so this past week, Antonio Guterres, the current Secretary General, the Portuguese Secretary General, has been oozing celebratory kind of tweets and social media kind of comments about the foundation of the United Nations anniversary. And there has been nothing in response to that to show that the United Nations is itself, the bureaucracy is accountable or open to accountability, demands, and rigorous analysis by people who are activists like myself, campaigners like myself, advocates like myself, commentators like myself, but others who are directly, daily denied of basic human rights. And that's where the United Nations is failing. And I think 72 or 73 years is a long time for the organization to have been allowed to just continue as a bureaucracy mainly. It has not stopped any of the wars, the wars against the Afghans and the Iraqis or the Libyans or the assassinations or the murders of these heads of states. Now, even the supporters of the murderers in America, those who murdered Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein, even their supporters are now saying that things were much better when both Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein were in power. Now, I'm not saying that I would have said that at all, but strictly speaking, based on the evidence of the casualties, the numbers of people who have been murdered, since both of those were respectively murdered themselves under pretext of the one, Saddam Hussein was murdered by being put through a so-called process of judicial kind of examination of his evidence against him. And Gaddafi was murdered otherwise, straightforward, without even a pretense. Now, whatever their regimes did should and could have been addressed via the United Nations. If the United Nations were not a bureaucracy and the United Nations were actually doing its job of scrutinizing the behavior of the various member states, and it didn't. And the United Nations at that time was probably even worse represented by the Secretary General, one of the worst Secretary Generals was, of course, the overhyped Kofi Annan. Now, Kofi Annan is like Nelson Mandela being overpraised, and it is completely out of order because Kofi Annan was in place throughout most of the most illegal criminal behavior by the USA and Tony Blair against innocent people in Iraq. And that is something that needs to be examined in terms of the assessment that is overdue about the United Nations role and conduct and the people who are in place as Secretary General. I mean, Ban Ki-moon was another disaster, as had been Kofi Annan's predecessor, the Egyptian one, Boutros Ghali. Now, Boutros Ghali was an actual criminal. So the United Nations has been ill-served by occupants in the post of Secretary General. And there is no forum, there is no actual audit of the United Nations every day, which the world deserves. The victims of the violations across the world deserve the United Nations agencies' behavior to be scrutinized and audited every day. So what am I saying here in part B of the original exclusive diagnosis of the British press is this. There is no mention of any of this. What I have said, there is no mention of what I have said. There is no even kind of remote resemblance to what I said in any of the papers. So that shows the emptiness of Fleet Street. Now, going back to the lawyers, so-called in the Bar Council, it says that the Bar Council had a meeting with this Attorney General, who is Suella Braverman, and it says, boastfully it says, 5 QCs confronted the Attorney General during yesterday's meeting, telling her that a crime which broke the law in a specific and limited way. The phrase used by the Northern Ireland Secretary, Brandon Lewis, when he announced the move, was still a crime. They said, the 5QC said that Boris Johnson was committing a crime. The attacks came as Boris Johnson faced a growing rebellion over the explosive proposals in the internal market bill, with more senior Tories suggesting they could not support provisions that ministers admit breach international law. Former Prime Minister Sir John Major and Tony Blair jointly condemned this behavior and plot by Boris Johnson. And they're saying that Brexit legislation is imperiling the Irish peace process, trade negotiations, and the UK's integrity. It puts the Good Friday Agreement at risk because it negates the predictability, political stability, and legal clarity that are integral to the delicate balance between the North and South of Ireland. That is at the core of the peace process, they wrote in the Sunday Times. Now, this is all absolutely basic fact. But the problem is that such basic, accurate fact was presented by opponents of Brexit when Boris Johnson was violating the law and proroguing the parliament and all the rest of it. And it didn't stop the country being hijacked by Boris Johnson with the complicity of a stupid leadership by the Labour Party, or in the name of the Labour Party. So we shall be continuing on this in the next part C.